your financing activity is all about financing. I mean, the scary part about that, and this is where I know Dave Ramsey, don't show him this podcast, right?
I'm sending it to him.
It's
Hashtag
right to
Dave Ramsey. So let's pivot to professionally. Tell me a little about your professional experience and what have you kind of been doing and what are you doing now?
Yeah. So after finished my degree in finance, I spent a few years working for the Small Business Development Center, which is a great resource. Every state has one, and it is there for small businesses, and it's free management consulting. Because it's part of what you pay for in your taxes.
All right.
So,
hard-earned taxpayer dollars at work.
Right.
So that's the SB...
So it's the Small Business Development Center.
DC. Okay.
Yeah.
So how long did you work there?
So I worked for the University of Georgia. Most of them are attached to the university. I worked there for 2 years doing management consulting. So I consulted with about 100 small business owners in a variety of industries, in a variety of areas. They really have to be kind of all things. So it really let me see... I help people with their finance and their QuickBooks.
Yep.
I help people with their marketing. I help people with their hiring. Those were usually the big three, right? Like, help me with my sales and my marketing. Help me hire and find some people, and tell me how to do QuickBooks because that's a pain in the butt.
Yes.
So
nothing quick about QuickBooks.
Nothing quick about it. It keeps getting slow. Yeah. Anyway. So I did management consulting, and then our family business and my wife's family has a jewelry retail business here down in the historic market that my in-laws started back in 1974. So we're going on 49 years. So in 2 years, we'll hit the 50 mark
awesome.
in 2025. So that's going to be pretty amazing.
How long were you in that business?
So my wife and I operated that for 7 years.
Okay.
So that's what brought us back to Charleston.
Was that after the Small Business Development Center?
That was after the Small Business, yeah. So I was consulting with those. Fortunately, my father-in-law passed. So the business was going from first generation to second generation, was making that transition. And kind of through that transition, my wife and I were like, hey, I'm consulting with these businesses, but we felt like family was really the most important.
Yeah.
And family business is really most important. And so we came down much to everybody telling us that it was the worst decision. Don't do it. Don't get involved in family business. So never really got a lot of support in coming down and doing that. But the Lord has blessed us a lot in that. As I look back, it wasn't all roses and rainbows, but we had a good time, and it continues to be there. So we still own it. We've stepped away from the operations, but operated that for 7 years. And when we passed those operations on, stepped back, and I knew I wanted to, I've always kind of had this seed of wanting to own and operate a business, just kind of doing something that's one of those where I had that, but I'm not really a good starter. And I realized that about myself. So went into acquiring a business. So took us
business acquisition.
So, and that's another one of those things now that's becoming like super popular. I didn't really jump on the trend like it's a trendy thing, but entrepreneurship through acquisition is kind of the technical term that they have now.
Entrepreneurship through acquisition.
Yeah. And so that's kind of the thing. But so we went to acquire a business because I know I'm kind of a builder. If I have just enough clay, I know I can kind of mold it and shape it. Those are what my skill sets are.
That's great that you recognize that. Yeah. You weren't like, I got to be a maverick. I got to do the startup thing. Yeah. Like you're like, no, I need a little bit of infrastructure. I need the idea. I need something that I can lock into, and then I can build it. And grow it.
And so,
how long did you from the retail jewelry store? How long was it that you were researching, whatever, before you actually made that acquisition?
That's been a really long journey. So we, I think it started back even in grad school. Because most of the classes we talked about, it's all this M&A and blah, blah, blah. And so that kind of like flamed these little embers, of to speak. And then when I was at the jewelry store, I started looking for acquiring new retail locations.
Yeah.
Because I felt like that was a better way of expanding than just starting from scratch. Also trying to find locations a lot of times. A lot of the best locations generally have a store in them. So rather than hoping, that store is going to become available and you can get that space, it's just easier to acquire the whole thing if possible. So I started putting my finger on it and looking, and we found some acquisitions and looked at those. So I've kind of got familiar and was always kind of looking.
Okay. Was there a point when you really got serious?
Yes. So once we left the operations over, I went into full-time search mode.
Okay.
And so we looked at about 150 businesses.
Whoa.
In the time. And
when you say look, you're not talking about scrolling online.
No. When I say look, I mean I actually reached out, got what they call the Certified Information Memorandum, right? So I've got all
Certified Information Memorandum.
Yeah,
CIM.
CIM. Get the SIM.
What is that?
So most in the process,
is that like a one sheet on the business?
Yeah, it usually has all the details. So most of the time, you got like these ads for the business, like you can scroll biz, buy, sell,
classifieds for business.
All these classifieds.
Where do you just real quick on that? Where do you go to find businesses for sale?
For sale, I mean, you can go. Biz Buy Sell is probably the biggest online marketplace.
So it's bizbuysell.
Correct.
.com. Okay.
But then there's like website closers. They do specifically websites like e-commerce.
Like they're selling e-commerce sites?
E-commerce sites.
So there's businesses that don't have brick and mortar stores.
Don't have brick and mortar.
They're just online.
Okay. There's business brokers that will help you kind of find those. I mean, there's a lot of different routes. You can run a direct search where you could reach out directly to business owners. If
see one you love. Hey, are you interested?
Are you interested in selling? That takes a lot more time and effort than just looking at classifieds.
All right, so let's circle back. So, because I paused there. So you said you investigated, you researched 150?
Yeah.
Okay, so go back to that. So what does that look like? Walk me through one.
Walk you through one. Well, so generally you're looking through the ads, right? And the turnover, it's slow, but you find something that is of interest.
Yeah.
For whatever. Generally, you want to set your criteria. So, I had some structure of criteria that I'm looking within.
Can you share some of that? Or
yeah, I mean, so revenue, generally was looking at revenue around $1 million.
What's your thought process there? Why $1 million?
Well, for me, the thought process is because $1 million's it's one of those like magic numbers, right? Most businesses, entrepreneurs that start a business can grow it, and they're usually your first goal is to try to get $1 million in revenue.
Okay.
By the time you get to $1 million in revenue is where all of a sudden most businesses kind of peak out. You see a lot of businesses peak out at $1 million.
Really?
Yeah. So there's like just that mark.
That's a mile marker.
It's a mile marker that people are trying to get to, and it generally means that the person who started, the entrepreneur, has gotten to a point where now you got to start putting in business structures.
Okay.
Right.
Like what? What does that mean?
So you got to start hiring some employees because you can't do it all.
Yeah.
So I've got to hire and manage some employees.
Yeah.
Right. I have to put in.
Well, was he able to do it by himself?
Sometimes. I mean, there are $1 million business people can do on their own.
Wow.
I mean, yeah. So, I mean, they may have an employee or two, right? Which is another one. That was another one of my criteria. Which
I guess it depends on if it's like a service industry business or if it's like a product. Or
I mean, and these are all kind of loose guidelines. Yeah. So when I say $1 million, whatever. But
sure,
there's that inflection point in all businesses where you, as the business owner that started it, you were the business.
Right.
And now you're trying to start.
You're doing everything.
You're trying to graft yourself away from that. So now you got to start putting in, business structure. So I got to start putting in technology. How's all my technology working? I got to think about how I'm communicating. Right. Because I can't be on 24/7 and I've got to have some employees and I've got to have, some marketing. Right. Because now it can't just be me and just a few clients. Like I've got to go kind of be in more mass. So that $1 million to me had those problems that I liked solving that I felt like I can solve, right? Because that's what I can do. It's got cash flow. It's coming slowly, but it's struggling to kind of get to that next level. So,
which is where you have a lot of knowledge and experience growing.
So, most private equity. So if we kind of jump over to that MBA school, private equity are generally looking at $5 million businesses. So the ideal business that most people like at the sellable point to a private equity group would be $5 million in they want $5 million in EBITDA. Sorry, let me take that back. So $5 million in EBITDA, which usually makes them around $10 million in revenue.
Top line.
Because they're looking for they want about 10, 15% net to the bottom, right?
All right, so let's pause just for our viewers.
Yeah.
Let's go back and let's talk about what is a private equity.
So private equity is businesses that, unlike banks, are going and getting a bank loan, right?
Okay.
There are investors, but rather than investing their money in the stock market, they will invest their money in purchasing a business.
Okay.
Right?
Is it a group?
Most of the time, they're groups.
Okay.
It can be what they call individual
private equity firms.
So,
okay.
I mean, the universe is kind of hazy. It's kind of like a wild, wild west. So
Okay.
people use all sorts of terms and stuff. There are what's called independent sponsors, which is technically what I would be classified as in the sense that I'm a single person who is then operating like a private equity group because I'm putting all the investment in.
Okay.
Right? Private equity, generally what they do is they raise funds. So they're going to go to
Other investors?
Generally, you have to be an accredited investor. So there are certain rules that actually technically make you an accredited investor. And individuals can hit that. It depends on what your salary range is or kind of your taxes. There's some things you can Google that if you want to know the details.
How do you find private equity firms?
Oh,
do you Google?
I mean, you can Google them. I mean, most of them don't want to be seen because most want to work in the shadows. Right?
Okay.
But yeah, you can Google them. I mean, you've heard of them. There's some, and they work in all sorts of spaces. Generally, they're going to target to some niche. They're going to have some specialty, right?
Like restaurants.
So they're going to do restaurants. I'm into manufacturing. So, I know how to do machines and manufacturing and manage that cash flow. They may be into like early startups. Those are the ones that you hear all the time.
Yeah.
A lot of the Valley, Silicon Valley groups. So you'll hear those because they like to get in early.
So you use them as a way to get your loan.
So it's
what is that? Is it a loan?
It's not a loan. Well, because if you're selling out and you're cashing out, see, that's the thing you got to think about when you're selling a business is what do you want out of it, right? So
hold on, go back. Is the private equity firm, are you using the private equity firm to acquire a business?
You could. So
do people do that?
They do. So like what they'll do is they'll sponsor you. So like if I found a private equity, they'd be willing to give me the money, right? Most private equity firms, one of their biggest challenges is finding an operator. Right? Because if I'm going to go buy your business and you're the owner and you're like, I want to retire, I'm peacing out.
Right.
Right. Well, that leaves a hole that if I come in, private equity, they don't want to they want control.
Right. But they don't want to show up.
But they don't want to show up on a daily basis because it's investing, it's not operating. But they, control goes along with the money. So they generally have a very good thesis on like why they're investing their money. But they need an operator to like come in and run it and operate it.
Okay.
So what they kind of do is they find people that they'll sponsor that want to acquire a business. They put in the equity. They generally want that person to put in some equity because they want those people to have skin in the game. There you go. So that's how that works. I mean, where you see that in the ETA or entrepreneur through acquisition is what these groups are called. They're running search funds.
Yep.
So a lot of MBAs that want to be fast tracking themselves to the CEO seat, what they'll do is they go and find a search fund. They sponsor, the search fund sponsors them for 2 years. So it gives them a small salary, helps them find a business. And then once they find the target, the private equity comes in, invests, and then they go in as the operator. So that's kind of the model that's happening.
So if you're wanting to acquire, so like in your case, when you were looking for that $1 million business, go back to that.
Yep.
So the first analytic was $1 million of top line revenue.
So yeah, for me, so what I try to do is take that model and I was trying to boil it down into a smaller. It kind of works.
Okay.
But top line, $1 million, looking at trying to get about 300,000 in, when I say EBITDA, it's earnings before interest, taxes, and depreciation. Right?
Say it again.
So earnings before interest, taxes, and depreciation.
Okay.
So that's generally your cash flow outside of any financing activity, right? That's why that term is that. So what I'm looking for is the cash that the business is throwing off that then I can use to pay back loans or do whatever. But I want to look at the cash before there's any financing going on.
And why is that important?
Because you're going to change the structure. Because whatever the owner's structure was is not the structure that you're going to have moving forward. Does that make sense?
Give me an example.
So maybe they have so if they may be leveraged 50%. This is easy number, right?
So like, they owe a bank.
So they have a bank loan, right?
Or the private equity
they're
firm.
producing $300,000 of cash flow, but they're paying $150 in loan payments.
Okay.
But I acquire it debt free.
Pay cash, right?
Just pay cash. So now I have $300,000 coming to me because I don't have to pay off the loan. Or more likely is they've owned the business so long, they've paid off all their debt.
Okay.
They have no debt.
Okay.
And I'm going to take it on with the loan. And now I'm going to have $150,000 loan payment, not loan payment, but loan for a year when I'm looking at it on the annual basis. So that structure of however you're going to finance it will change depending on the owner. So you're looking before that point. Then there's also like things that people can do. So your non-cash items like depreciation, you and your CPA can get together and decide how you're going to write things off. Business owners get really creative in some of the things that they do.
But you were looking, so back to the list, you were looking at $1 million top line revenue, EBITDA of
like 300,000.
300,000 plus. What else?
That, and then generally had some employees.
1, 2,
1,
5?
2.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, just any. Because at that point, like you said, they generally don't. But
you need some bodies.
But I needed some bodies because I needed people operating it because I want the business to be like limping along.
Yeah.
At least moving along.
Yeah.
And so having some employees at least tells you that they've gotten to some level of sophistication.
Right.
We didn't do a great job on this one acquisition, but we're getting there.
So before we get to that, were there any other parameters that you were looking for through those 150 that you really explored?
That I really explored? Oh.
Were there any other boundaries? Did it have to be in the state, in the city? Like, were you looking here in Charleston? Or?
Here in Charleston. Well, that's another interesting one. So that has really changed in acquisition in recent years.
Okay.
It used to be, yes, in looking for something geographical, because if you're going to operate it, you need to be local to it.
Right.
Right. One of the challenges, though, with that in acquisition is, unlike houses, these are even farther and fewer between, right? So you would look, and then 3 months later, it's still the same businesses. The turnover on them doesn't turn over as quickly. So you kind of like had like these ups and downs, right? So you look, there'd be some new things, and then there's kind of this like really quiet period, and you're like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do?
Right.
Right. And then all of a sudden something pops on.
So the inventory of businesses for sale it's
pretty low.
It's low and slow.
Unless you really open your geographic. That was the problem that I had early on, right? When you talk about family, it's like if you open up your geographic. So I looked at a search fund. I talked to some guys here in Charleston that ran a search fund that would sponsor me through that, just like we were talking about. They had one caveat. You want to know what their caveat was?
Sure.
You have to be willing to move anywhere in the United States. That's the caveat, because they don't know where the business is going to be. So you have to be willing to move to where the business is.
Yeah. That I assume that was a no.
That was their one caveat. That's what we haven't gotten to the family and wife part yet, but you had John on the podcast, right? And his one thing was like, wife more important than the kids.
Yeah.
Wife more important than the business.
Yeah.
So
for sure.
That gets forgot a lot about too. But yeah, so we did not want to leave Charleston, which was a struggle. But it's been changing, which is why the e-commerce was so intriguing to me, because I have a computer science background. So I know e-commerce. that's one big piece that I did on the jewelry store was we had no e-commerce. So I started the entire e-commerce, right? Got it online and got a lot of our inventory online and got systems where we could get all that and keep track of it. So I'd done e-commerce. E-commerce businesses, though, don't have that geographic constraint.
Right.
Right? Oh my gosh. All of a sudden, now this whole universe, you can go buy all these e-commerce businesses and, now competition just went out the roof.
Right.
So prices for e-commerce businesses are crazy. I mean, they're going for 11, 15 times multiple. Most businesses are around 3.
Wow.
So,
and that multiple is on net?
It's on that EBITDA.
Or the EBITDA.
Usually on the cash flow. You'll hear those if you in learning that just like sometimes you hear EBITDA, that's like the MBA term. You'll hear seller discretionary earnings, right? You'll hear.
Is that the same?
That's kind of the same thing in the small world. So you hear seller discretionary earnings. You'll hear operating cash is what people will call it sometimes, right? So like, this is what my operating cash is, net operating cash. So,
but not net income.
Not net income. No.
And one more time, just go through why not net income.
Net income has all your financing decisions rolled up into them. And so,
or lack thereof.
Or whatever. So the same business, right? If we have the same business, same $1 million top line, same $300,000 EBITDA, but one's carrying 50% debt and the other one's not, their net income's going to look very different.
Got it.
Exact same business.
Got it.
But one's going to have net income of 300,000, one's going to have net income of 150, and you're going to say, well, that 300,000 looks a lot better.
Yeah.
And you're like,
that's just because.
Well, it's just because they
don't have the debt.
They don't have the debt, right?
Yeah.
Like, you are losing some in the interest. I mean, obviously, it's not exactly.
But couldn't you make the argument though that the fact that it doesn't have debt is a better business, and they are making more in terms of net?
I mean, better business depends on how you want to define better.
Well, sorry.
Well, what I mean
higher
by
value, higher valuation.
No.
Really?
No, not. I mean, your financing activity is all about financing. I mean, the scary part about that, and this is where I know Dave Ramsey, don't show him this podcast, right?
I'm sending it to him. Hashtag Dave Ramsey, hashtag send it to him.
And there's, and this is where there are people where it's like, so businesses, as you take on debt, and we'll give you $100,000 MBA, right? No need to go spend the money.
Great. Give it to us.
As you take on debt, right? What happens? Your return on your dollars in goes up. So, right. So like for example, if I'm going to buy a business.
$1 million business.
$1 million business.
Top line. And I want to be debt free. Yeah.
And that business is 300,000. So let's say I'm paying $1 million for it.
Okay.
I've got to have $1 million in cash.
Right.
That's a lot of cash.
Yeah.
But if I go buy that same business and I get a bank to give me the money and I can put in 50,000, 100,000, let's make it like 10%.
Okay.
Put in 100,000. Well, I put in 100,000, I'm getting 300,000 out, right? 100 in, 3,000 coming out versus putting $1 million in and 3,000 coming out.
300,000.
Right. 300,000.
Yeah.
Like, do you want to put in 100 and get 300,000? Or you want to put in $1 million and get 300,000? Right. Now, there's a caveat to that. That would mean you leverage to 100% because as you leverage, your return on your dollars you put in goes up. However, the flip side of that is the risk of default, right? And that's what banks are looking at. This is what the banks play, the game that they're playing is.
Right.
The more that the business is leveraged, the more return I get as like dollar in, dollars out.
You as the business owner.
As the business owner, but you're taking on much more risk. You're giving yourself, hamstrung. So that's when you say better in the sense that, and you have to balance those things. I mean, everything in life is a choice.
Sure.
Right.
There's risk with everything.
So I'm not saying go leverage all your businesses.
Yeah.
Don't hear that.
Don't do that?
Don't necessarily do that.
I'll just scratch that out.
There you go.
Cut that now.
But I'm not saying, debt free, it can be a goal. It can be a choice, but having some loan and leverage can also be helpful. I think you have to find those personal levels that you're willing to kind of take, just like an investment.
Yeah.
And then I also look at it different as personal debt and business debt, which, you know, people have opinions on that too. But like personal, yes, debt free all day. That's what Dave Ramsey is, you know, spouting. And I agree with that. I mean, like there's just some level when your house is paid off, there's just stress and anxiety that you do not have to deal with, right? Yeah. Like, you know, you can weather storms. You know, in business, you know, hopefully you have some steady cash flow. So there is probably some minor part where you can leverage that to a point. Also, if you want to do a project and you need some money, bankers like to bank with people to have relationships with. So a lot of times it's, you know, just having a small loan, just to have a relationship with your banker. Yeah. So, I mean, it's kind of having the backups, right? So like you have options. It's kind of keeping your options open to keep things going. So, you know, you kind of look at those elsewhere, not to get into politics, but like, you know, I mean, that's where Trump said, you know, I've never declared bankruptcy, but he's had lots of businesses that have declared bankruptcy, right? He personally never has, but he has lots of businesses that have. Right. Right. So there's kind of that separation.
Hey, please subscribe to The Lifeguard Show. We'd love for you to be a part of our community, and make sure that you ring that bell so you can be notified of our next video release. And if you have any suggestions of content, please contact us through our website, thelifeguardshow.com, or you can leave us a comment in one of the videos on our YouTube channel.